welcome to today's episode of the Balanced Approach podcast. I'm your host, Louis Padian. I hope that you're doing well and are enjoying the podcast and the topics we've covered so far. These podcasts are released every Monday, Wednesday and Friday, so be sure to subscribe wherever you are listening to be kept up to date.
So today I thought it would be really important to cover things that can manipulate scale weight, as often people feel really disheartened or have a poor relationship with the scales as they don't really understand what's making it go up or down. So we're going to be covering what sort of factors or what things to look out for or be aware of to hopefully build a bit more of a positive relationship with the weighing scales, because they can be a really positive tool, especially for weight loss and weight gain. So the 7 key factors that I'm going to cover here, they vary in the amount that they affect body weight, but they don't really exist in isolation, as we can't pick one single thing from food and say, well, that's caused all of it, as often there's multiple factors that can influence our scale weight, and we'll quickly whiz through them now. So first of all is fluid balance or hydration, the amount of water that you've had in your diet or that you've been drinking or not been drinking or not had in your diet. And this is probably the biggest influence in my opinion, and often, or when we talk through the rest of the factors that can influence it, a lot of them will play on water balance as well. It can be influenced by hormones, by the amount of water you're drinking, exercise, sweating if you're in a particularly hot environment, and all these factors can cause the scales to change, but not necessarily change our body fat levels, and can dramatically be changed across a short period. So people who are making weight-making sports or trying to make weight for weightlifting, combat sports, for example, will manipulate this factor a lot. As we know, the body is up to 60-70% water. So we can manipulate that large store a little bit. It can have a huge impact. I've seen in some cases some people losing up to, across 24 hours, 24 pounds in body weight, none of which will be body fat, but it has a dramatic impact on the scales, which sort of underlines why the scales are an imperfect tool, but we need to understand the limitations of them as well. Second of all, which is closely linked, is salt intake. So having a really salty meal or taking salt out of the diet can really influence your body weight. Salt plays an important part in our body in general with regards to functioning of sort of processes within the body. So we wouldn't advise cutting it out completely. We need a certain amount of salt within our diet. However, having a salty meal the evening before or just before you step on the scales can have an influence or impact on the scale weight and cause it to go up, and people might get disheartened by that, but it's just down to the increased water retention due to the salt intake. Next up, closely linked to that, is carbohydrates, and as I've said, that a lot of these factors will manipulate water, which is a huge store within the body, and carbohydrates do exactly that as well. So for every gram of carbohydrate in your diet, you will absorb 2 to 3 grams of water and store that within your muscle. And if we add that across the day, it can be a huge amount of potential water storage we're getting within there. So if you're having a higher carbohydrate diet or a lower carbohydrate diet, and this is where we see keto diets really take advantage of this, is that when you cut the carbohydrates out of your diet, you're actually cutting a lot of water, and people see a big drop in the scales within the first week or so. Really motivating, but people often think that, oh, this keto diet, I've lost a huge amount of body fat within the first week. Actually, it's just a lot of water weight, and as soon as they've reintroduced carbohydrates to their diet, again, will regain that water weight as well. And it's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's just something to be aware of in there. So it can be manipulated up to a couple of kilos just by cutting carbohydrates out. Again, combat sports people who have to make weight often do this as well. Next on the list is one that's often not considered, and I didn't consider it for a while until I read about it, and it can have an impact, and that is muscle damage. So if you've had a example where, I don't know, went for a long run, say a marathon or something like that, or a really, really tough gym session, and I mean really, really tough where you're aching for a long period of time, or potentially you've got a bruise or an injury where you've taken a big impact and it's really swelled up, again, will increase water retention. That inflammation is part of that will be water. So having that awareness and going, well, if I've been for a big walk over the weekend, or I've been really active this weekend, I step on scales on a Monday, and actually I think that I should have lost weight because I haven't really eaten, I've probably exercised more and eaten a similar amount of food, so I should have lost weight. Actually, you may see some information there as well. So measurements and weighing scales might be up, but over the next couple of days that will drop down. So being aware of that, being aware of your physical activity levels, if you've got any swelling anywhere, again, can impact the scale weight massively. Number 5, and this is one that we would see people do quite a lot within slimming groups, is intestinal weight and sort of using this to their advantage. If they're stepping on the scales, for example, on Monday evening, they might not eat for the whole of Monday, have very little food, which I wouldn't recommend, because that sort of brings up that inconsistent variable. They're trying to manipulate that scale to benefit them, when actually they'll need to continue to do that to see the benefits long term, to actually see whether they're losing body fat or not. So not having any food in your digestive tract will make you a bit lighter. You know, if you have a meal and step on scales, you'll be heavier than you were before you had it. But there will be some digesting in your digestive tract, 24 hours, 48 hours. So being aware of that as well, that those sort of variables could influence scale weight massively as well. 6 on the list is stress. And this is something that you might think, well, I'm stressed, therefore stress has multiple aspects to this, really. That stress can change our behaviors, but actually high levels of cortisol chronically can cause water retention. I've seen this in clients as well, where they've been highly stressed, we've dieted for a long period of time, they should be losing weight, they're not, and then we might have a weekend off or reduce the amount of activity or increase their food, which reduces their stress, and you might see a drop in their body weight over the next couple of days. And again, it's almost like a flushing effect. And this is an extreme example of this, actually. For example, would be Cushing's disease, where people have extremely high levels of cortisol, and results in high levels of water retention. So that water retention, again, plays a huge role, and lots of things that can influence that. So day to day, if you can manage your stress, that you're not chronically elevated cortisol levels, again, would benefit you and have more consistent variables across a long period of time. Number 7, and this one is more for women, so it's around the menstrual cycle. Different parts of the menstrual cycle influence women's bodies differently, and again, it varies between individuals as well, but this can be impacted, or what scale weight can be impacted by up to 5 kilos for some women just throughout changes in their cycle. So being aware of where you are in the cycle. So if I'm working with women, I usually tend to have a 4-week average and have a look at the next 4-week block as well, depending on where their menstrual cycle is. But comparing week 1 of the cycle to week 1 of your next cycle is probably a lot more accurate, with consistent variables with regards to hormones. And like week 2 to week 2, week 3 to week 3, week 4 to week 4 is going to be a lot more reliable than comparing week 1 of your cycle to week 4 of your cycle, because things might change. For some women, it might be okay, but for others, that's probably a better approach as well. So there's the 7 things that can influence it. So you might say, well, if all these things can influence it, then are the scales any good? Yes, they are, but they do have limitations. And I'd say, like I said in the previous episodes, using it as part of your measuring your progress with other tools can be the best way to do it, understanding the limitations of it. So using your scales to measure your body weight, brilliant. But how we're going to do that? Well, I'd probably measure it multiple times per week, and comparing that average across the average for the next week and the next week and the next week. If you're a woman, maybe week 1 of your cycle, the average from that week to week 1 of your cycle on your next cycle, and having a look at, on average, if we're moving in the right direction. All these things that I've mentioned previously around salt, carbohydrates, stress, your menstrual cycle, all these things can influence short-term fluctuations in your body weight. But over a long period of time, what we will see is changes in your body fat levels and probably your muscle mass as well, and how that impacts your scale weight long-term on average. So we're looking for that long-term trend. If we're trying to lose weight, that trend should be trending down week on week. There'll be fluctuations, but on average, trending down. What I'd do alongside weighing your scale, using your weighing scales, would be things like using progress photos, having a look at how your body looks and changes over time, using measurements as well. And what we're trying to do is create a broader, brighter picture with all these things, rather than just looking at one variable, looking at all these other different ways that we can measure progress physically if we're looking to lose weight, and seeing if the data is all adding up. So whilst scale weight might not be budging for a week or 2, measurements might be down. Progress photos, you might see a dramatic difference there. You might feel a big difference in the way that your clothes are fitting, which is another way that I do it, and it's definitely worth using. And you might feel that your energy levels are better, you're feeling stronger, you're feeling fitter, all these types of things, all these questions and variables that I would get clients to reflect on, I'd encourage you to use as well. So this will, again, help us assess whether the methods that we are using to get you where you want to be are the right methods for you. Because if the scale weight's going down, but your clothes the same. If you're not really feeling great or your progress varies, you feel that you're not really seeing much of a difference. If your questions, your energy's through the floor, it's terrible, got poor sleep, your training's rubbish at the moment, then we'll probably have to have a look at what's going on, because yes, we are getting the result that we want, which is weight loss, but actually how we're doing that isn't adding to other aspects of your health, well-being and happiness as well. So having a look at all these holistic measures and making sure they're all moving on average in the right direction is probably the best way to go about using the scales and being aware of the limitations of them as well. So being aware of all the things that can influence it the day before, being a bit more critical of what have you had in the last 24 hours regards to food. Are you hydrated to the same level? Whereabouts in your menstrual cycle you potentially are? Have you had a particularly tough few days training wise or activity wise the last few days? Are you particularly stressed at work? All these things are worth considering as well. But definitely, if you want to use the scales to measure your progress long term, I'd 100% encourage it, but being aware of pitfalls with it is definitely worth considering as well.
So there you have it. Thank you very much for listening to today's episode of the Balanced Approach podcast. If you have any questions, queries, or would like to reach out to me, please do. I am at Louis Padian Nutrition, which is at LOUISPADIAN Nutrition on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and all other social media platforms. If you're looking for support in achieving your goals and living a healthier, happier, and more balanced life in the process, click the link below and inquire about working with me. Remember to subscribe to the Balanced Approach podcast wherever you're listening for more insightful episodes, and I look forward to speaking to you soon.